Every year, Europe loses hundreds of thousands of its most educated, most ambitious professionals. Not to war, not to poverty, to a better mathematical deal. This is not only an Eastern European problem, this is a continental structural failure, and the data is unambiguous. Today, we will map the exact anatomy of this crisis. We will expose the nations quietly subsidizing the workforce of their geopolitical rivals. The governments so desperate for tax revenue that they have built golden enclaves for foreign billionaires while pricing out their own engineers. And the global predators who have designed their entire economic architecture around one simple goal, capturing the human capital that Europe keeps pushing away. And above all, we will show you something important. None of this is accidental. It is the direct consequence of a deliberate choice made by governments across this continent. The choice to protect their past instead of investing in their future. Welcome to Amazing Europe. 80%. According to a landmark study by the Institut Montaigne, that is the share of students at France's elite grandes écoles who say they are ready to leave the country the moment they graduate. Let's start with the heavyweights. France is currently witnessing a devastating exodus of its top talent. A recent report revealed a brutal reality. France is the only major European nation suffering a net brain drain of artificial intelligence inventors. They are hemorrhaging their best minds to North America and neighbouring Switzerland. Why? It is not a conspiracy. It is a math problem. A senior software engineer in Paris peaks at around $90,000 a year. That exact same profile in Silicon Valley commands upwards of $320,000. But the tax burden is only half the story. France has tried to fix the equity problem. In recent years, it introduced startup stock option schemes and a flat tax of 30% on capital gains. Real reforms. But the gap remains unbridgeable. Between France and the United States, there is not only a huge difference in salaries, but many professionals can also own equity in the company they work for, a company that can scale globally within 2 years. The real poison is the corporate ecosystem. France is paralyzed by a culture of seniority. In the United States, a brilliant young engineer is made an owner. In France, that same talent is handed a rigid contract and told to quietly wait their turn. The macroeconomic consequence is stark. The French state spends billions funding world-class universities only to act as a free training camp for American big tech. France is not just losing talent, it is literally subsidizing the workforce of its geopolitical rivals. 35%. According to Eurostat, that is the staggering proportion of Spanish university graduates currently trapped in jobs that do not even require a degree. Welcome to Spain, the unexploded surplus. While France actively punishes its elite, Spain simply has no room for them. According to the Spanish National Statistics Institute, nearly 3 million Spaniards now live abroad. And they are not just taking a gap year. In 2024 alone, 397,000 Spaniards emigrated to countries outside the European Union, making Spain the EU nation with the second highest rate of extracontinental brain drain. Every year, significant numbers of doctors officially deregister from the National Medical Registry, escaping crushing workloads and non-competitive salaries. Why is this happening? Look at the macroeconomic model. Spain has produced the most highly educated generation in its history, but its economy remains heavily dependent on low-value added services. Tourism, hospitality, seasonal work. National research and development spending is stuck at a miserable 1.5% of GDP, well below the European average. Spain excels at creating seasonal jobs. It utterly fails at creating high-end careers. This generates a structural paradox. In regions like Castilla y León, local businesses report critical shortages of engineers and technicians, yet national youth unemployment remains stubbornly above 20%. How is this mathematically possible? because local salaries are so disconnected from the global market that Spanish engineers would rather buy a one-way ticket to Germany or Latin America than work at a massive discount at home. The result is a tragic asymmetric exchange. Spain heavily taxes its citizens to fund world-class technical universities, only to export its native engineers and import low-skilled labour to keep its hotels running. 150,000 euros. According to estimates from Romania's College of Physicians, that is roughly what it costs the Romanian taxpayer to train a single specialist doctor. And since 2007, Romania has effectively donated over 20,000 doctors to the healthcare systems of Western Europe. Welcome to Romania, the silent financier of the West. The Romanian brain drain is a structural failure of the European single market. While the EU facilitates the free movement of labour, it lacks the fiscal union to compensate countries like Romania for the massive investments they make in human capital. The numbers are staggering. Over 3 million Romanians, nearly 15% of the entire population, now live and work abroad. Some World Bank estimates suggest this hemorrhage costs Romania between 1 and 2% of GDP every single year. The healthcare sector is the most visceral example of this collapse. As young professionals flee for higher wages across Western Europe, Romania is systematically stripping its own rural regions of essential medical care. Local hospitals are closing entire departments, leaving the elderly and the vulnerable with no access to basic treatment. The tragic irony is absolute. Those exact same Romanian doctors are now the backbone of healthcare systems from Rome to Berlin to Paris. While Western clinics are reinforced by these highly trained professionals, the Romanian villages that paid for their education are left with a ghost town medical system. Romania is paying to train the very workforce that sustains the prosperity of its wealthier neighbours. It is a one-way street of human capital, where the periphery subsidizes the core. If Romania is being drained, the Western Balkans are being emptied. According to the World Bank, nearly 25% of the entire Western Balkan population already lives outside the region. We are not looking at emigration. We are looking at a slow-motion demographic implosion. In Albania, over 40% of the entire population now lives abroad. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, that figure approaches 50%. The emigration rate across the region has increased by 10% in just the last decade alone. The math of a functioning society is simply broken. While the causes are complex, the regional logic is a poisonous mix of institutional paralysis and systemic nepotism. Across the Balkans, from Serbia to Kosovo, the job market is suffocated by what locals call partokratia. Your career advancement depends less on your talent and more on your political loyalty. The economic bleeding is silent but massive. Serbia alone loses an estimated 1.2 to 2 billion euros in human capital every single year, roughly 2% of its entire GDP simply evaporating across the border. But look at the structural trap. This is not just about labour leaving. Because the youth are fleeing, the remaining base is too small to fund modern infrastructure or pension systems. To keep the state running, these governments are forced to borrow heavily, driving up national debt to cover the gap left by the missing taxpayers. The region is financing its own decline through debt. Using future wealth to pay for a present, they are physically hollowing out. Now, we enter the territory of the hybrids. These are nations trapped in a sophisticated two-speed demographic game, simultaneously bleeding their best talent abroad while aggressively importing a new workforce to fill the gap. It is not just immigration, it is a structural, asymmetric replacement. Look at Poland. While it is regularly hailed as an economic miracle, the data tells a deeper and more unsettling story. Over 2.5 million Poles live permanently abroad, the highest figure in Central Europe. Poland continues to export its brightest minds, STEM professionals, researchers, and university graduates leaving for higher wages in Germany, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia. Yet, to keep its massive manufacturing machine running, the Polish state has become one of Europe's largest labour importers. Data from the Polish Social Insurance Institution shows that foreign workers now approach 8% of the entire national workforce. But here is the data point that changes everything. Studies consistently show that the majority of these workers are employed well below their actual qualification level. Poland is importing millions of Ukrainians alongside growing numbers of workers from South and Southeast Asia. Many of them degree holders ending up in warehouses and heavy logistics. It is the perfect definition of asymmetric industrial replacement. The native talent flees toward more advanced economies, while the economy is propped up by foreign professionals whose qualifications are systematically wasted in manual jobs. Poland is winning the growth game, but it is losing its intellectual future. 137%. According to Portuguese National Statistics Institute data, that is how much rental prices in central Lisbon skyrocketed between 2015 and 2023. In that same time frame, real wages for local workers grew by less than 12%. Welcome to Portugal, the high-end hybrid. Unlike Poland, which imports factory labour to keep its assembly lines moving, Portugal has executed a far more controversial strategy. It has not just imported labour, it has sold its own territory as a premium fiscal product. Born in 2009 and aggressively expanded during the post-bailout recovery years, the non-habitual resident regime offered a near-total exemption on foreign income and a flat 20% rate on Portuguese earnings for high-value professionals. It was designed to jumpstart the economy. It turned Lisbon into a playground for the global middle class. And by 2024, even the Portuguese government had acknowledged the failure, scrapping the regime entirely. The mathematical reality was always devastating. A local engineer in Lisbon earns roughly €1,200 a month. A digital nomad from California or London nets $5,000. When that nomad pays a premium for a luxury apartment, the local engineer is simply priced out of their own city. This crisis is a toxic mix of short-term rentals, a complete failure to expand housing supply, and tax incentives that inadvertently subsidized foreigners to displace citizens. Portugal's best young minds, its doctors, researchers, and engineers, are fleeing to Berlin or Amsterdam just to find an affordable roof over their heads. And to fill the resulting gaps, the state doubles down, attracting even more nomads. It is a self-feeding structural trap, a nation selling its future to pay for its present. Imagine a young Italian engineer, 28 years old, working at a tech firm in Milan. Their gross salary is €35,000. When you include everything the state extracts, from their paycheck and from the employer on top, nearly half of the total cost of that engineer simply disappears into taxation. Taxation that funds a pension system absorbing 16% of GDP, whose long-term sustainability is among the most precarious in Europe. This engineer is not just paying for the past, they are paying for their own inability to build a future at home. Welcome to Italy, the ultra-high-end hybrid. The Italian paradox is perhaps the most cynical in Europe. Since 2017, Italy has rolled out a red carpet for the global super-rich, offering a fixed annual fee covering all tax liability on foreign income. Originally set at €100,000 per year, the fee was raised to €200,000 in 2024. It remains a spectacular bargain for the world's wealthiest. Whether a billionaire earns 5 million or 50 million in foreign dividends, they pay that same flat fee, an effective tax rate that, for the ultra-rich, drops to barely 0.4%. At last count, fewer than 3,000 people benefit from this regime. Meanwhile, over 130,000 Italians formally register abroad every single year according to national registry data. The consequence is a legalized, institutionalized inequality. The state has decided that the capital of a foreign billionaire is more precious than the innovation of its own native engineers. The doom loop is complete. The working youth, crushed by taxes to fund an aging population, keep leaving. Italy has built golden enclaves for the global elite, while its own future is quite literally packing its bags. So far, we have analysed the exodus. These are just the most striking examples. Let us know in the comments which other countries you would add. But the crucial question remains, where do these people go? And more importantly, how have these destinations built such powerful magnets for talent? We aren't looking for political slogans. We are looking for the structural blueprints that make these countries work. Let's dive into the talent captors. Within the European continent, Switzerland is the ultimate talent captor. It operates as a regional economic vacuum, systematically drawing its workforce from the border regions of France, Germany, and Italy. The scale is striking. Nearly 400,000 registered frontier workers commute into Switzerland regularly, with Italian workers alone comprising over 65% of those crossing from the south. The core of this advantage is found in the data. According to Eurostat, the median equivalized net income in Switzerland sits at approximately €56,500 per year, converted at current exchange rates, a figure that dwarfs every neighbouring country. In cantons like Zug or Schwyz, the effective income tax rate for a high earner can be less than half that of an equivalent professional in Germany or France. But the true structural edge lies in the pension architecture. Most European nations rely on pure pay-as-you-go models, where current workers fund current retirees. As populations age and the ratio of workers to pensioners collapses, this creates a crushing fiscal burden on the young. Switzerland tackles this problem in a smarter way. Alongside a basic pension, it requires every worker to save their own money in a private, individual account for the future. Because the system does not dump the massive cost of current retirees exclusively onto the shoulders of today's workforce, the actual taxes taken from young professionals remain significantly lower than in neighbouring countries. Switzerland has built a system that simply makes more sense, and by doing so, it has created a gravitational pull that makes the smartest talent in Europe choose a new home. The United Kingdom is often seen as a major talent captor, but there is a hidden twist. The UK is bleeding just as fast as the countries it drains. Following the 2016 referendum, Britain set out to redefine itself as Global Britain. The strategic promise of Brexit was to break free from dependence on European labour and attract the world's best through a selective, points-based skilled worker visa. The goal was clear: replace unlimited EU migration with a curated influx of doctors, finance specialists, and tech professionals. London turned this system into a powerful magnet for qualified professionals. Thousands of Italians, French, and Eastern Europeans tired of rigid, low-wage labour markets chose London as their new base. Yet look at what the data actually delivered. Net migration into the UK hit record highs after Brexit, surpassing 700,000 in 2022, according to the Office for National Statistics. The system built to control immigration had paradoxically accelerated it. Meanwhile, the internal picture is equally striking. Over 100,000 British nationals emigrated in 2023 alone, headed primarily to Australia and Canada. They are escaping a decade of real wage stagnation, documented by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and a housing market where the median London property exceeds £500,000, over 14 times the median annual salary. This is the great British irony. London uses Europe as a reservoir to replace the talent it loses to the wider Anglosphere. It drains a doctor from Romania or a financial analyst from Italy to patch its public services, while its own professionals flee to Sydney or Toronto, chasing the purchasing power they can no longer find at home. Moving beyond Europe, we reach the global stage. The United Arab Emirates offers a deal that is mathematically impossible to ignore: 0% personal income tax. This has turned Dubai into the world's most powerful magnet for European entrepreneurs and high-earning professionals. According to the Henley Private Wealth Migration Report, the UAE attracted over 6,700 millionaires on a net basis in 2024 alone, more than any other country on Earth. It is a pure extraction of ambition. For a European freelancer exhausted by 40% plus in social contributions and income tax, the UAE delivers an immediate, brutal increase in net purchasing power. It is worth noting, since 2023, a 9% corporate tax applies to business profits above a defined threshold, but personal income remains entirely untaxed. The UAE now hosts over 8 million expatriates, with European businesses representing nearly 12% of multinationals newly established in Dubai in 2024 alone. But this El Dorado now carries a price that no spreadsheet can quantify. On February 28, 2026, following US and Israeli strikes on Iran, Tehran launched direct retaliatory attacks on military and civilian infrastructure across the Gulf. The region that promised absolute fiscal security is now facing its most severe geopolitical stress test in decades. How this reshapes the calculus for European entrepreneurs already living or planning to move to the Gulf is the question that will define the next chapter of global talent migration. But there is a specific set of nations that attracts our brightest minds more than anywhere else. Before we reveal them, if you found this analysis insightful, we kindly ask you to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our future deep dives. One final note before we continue. The data we have analysed so far maps a failure, but not every European nation has made the same choices. A small group of countries has kept its debt sustainable, its institutions functional, and its talent retention rates healthy. If you want a full analysis of those countries, type the word Europe in the comments. Finally, we reach the supreme predators, the Anglosphere and the United States. Canada and Australia mastered the art of demographic engineering. Through systems like Canada's Federal Express entry, they offered the European middle class a fast track to high-wage prosperity. But the door is now closing. Facing severe housing shortages and public pushback, Canada has restructured its federal immigration pathways, while Quebec has simultaneously tightened its own entirely separate system. Australia has capped new international student entries. What was once an open gate has become a highly selective bottleneck. But the final gear in the machine, the most powerful one, remains the United States. The drain here is not just of people, but of potential. We see this in something called the Delaware Flip. A promising European startup realizes it cannot grow large enough at home because the investment capital simply does not exist at scale. So, the company restructures its headquarters to the US. According to Index Ventures, the majority of European startups seeking American venture capital complete exactly this operation. Once there, they gain instant access to the massive pools of American investment that Europe cannot match. The raw numbers are undeniable. According to the Stanford AI Index, the US captured over 70% of global private AI funding in 2024. And the pay gap is equally stark. For a senior AI engineer at a major US technology firm, total compensation, salary, bonus, and stock options can routinely exceed $300,000 to $400,000 a year. In Europe, the ceiling for equivalent roles is often half that, further eroded by much higher tax rates. For the European innovator, the choice is increasingly binary: stay in a system that caps your upside, or move to an ecosystem that treats your talent as a compoundable asset. America offers something the European model has systematically stripped away: the possibility of radical personal ownership of one's own work. What we have mapped today is not a crisis that arrived overnight. It is the compounded result of deliberate choices, systems built to protect the past, at the direct expense of the future. The brain drain is not a mystery. It is a mirror. It reflects exactly what each society has chosen to value. The question now is whether Europe still has the political will to look at that mirror honestly. If you want to know which European nations are still trying to avoid this trap, type Europe in the comments. And it is not just the young who are struggling. In this video, you will discover which European nations will have the hardest time paying pensions in the coming years. That is all for this video. See you next time.